That's why I agreed to do this podcast when you reached out, because I'm like, I would love to share some of my journey with people so that people don't make the same mistakes that I made. It was brutal. And I wish I could do things differently. And I hope if there's anyone out there listening, take care of yourself. Because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't do anything great in the world. Because if you're not whole and grounded and strong, then yeah, you can't do stuff for other people or the planet.
Welcome to Your Digital Reputation. Here's your host, Roger Christie.
Hello, I'm Roger Christie, founder and principal at reputation advisory Propel. Thanks for joining me. Without a doubt, today's episode is the most raw, honest, and personal conversation I've ever had on the show. My guest is Mike Smith, founder of Untrash the Planet, but also former founder and CEO of ZeroCo, which is a fascinating founder story at the centre of our conversation. Years ago, Mike did what so many dream of doing. He had an idea, he had a mission, and he was out to change the world. And he did. He built ZeroCo from a kernel of an idea in his childhood bedroom into a business with more than 100,000 customers, including my family. And he became the poster child for crowdfunding along the way. But as often happens in business, it didn't all go to plan. ZeroCo had to be wound up, and Mike had to tell not just his team and his backers, but the whole world it was over. While founders are always generous with the good bits, they're often quieter about the rest. Which is why today's conversation is so powerful. Mike shares the whole story, the rise, the fall, the quiet that followed, and the second act he's on now. I'm incredibly grateful for how much and how honestly he shares in our conversation, and I know it will resonate with you. Whether you've ever put yourself on the line for something you believe in, or you're wondering what a digital reputation is really worth. Let's bring Mike in now. Thanks for coming on today, Mike. And for those listening who don't know your story, can you start by sharing a bit about you, your background, and maybe your journey up to when the ZeroCo idea was born?
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Rog. Bit about me. I'm a serial entrepreneur and sometimes environmentalist. And in more recent years, I've probably been more of an environmentalist and less of an entrepreneur. But the backstory to where ZeroCo kind of started was I had sold a previous business that was in the winemaking industry. And my wife and I went on a mini retirement. We took kind of 2 years out of work and traveled the world and just went to like the most crazy far-flung places on the planet. And the kind of brief for that trip was like, we just wanted to get out into nature and get as far off the tourist trail as we could and go and see some really remote, untouched parts of the world. And that's where the idea for ZeroCo came up, because I was just blown away by the amount of rubbish that I saw in really, really remote places. And prior to that trip, I didn't really consider myself an environmentalist so much. Like I grew up surfing, so I have a long lifetime connection to the ocean. But it was on that trip that I really became quite deeply concerned about how bad the global waste problem had gotten and probably still is today. And so I came back from that trip with this idea that I was going to build a business that was going to reduce single-use plastic and then fund ocean cleanups. And I moved back in with my parents. I was in my, mid-30s at the time. My wife and I moved into my parents' house, into my childhood bedroom, and I set about building a startup. And funnily enough, that is actually where I am today. I'm visiting my parents with my daughter at school holidays, and I'm sitting on the floor in my childhood bedroom. So it kind of feels like I've come full circle twice now on this journey.
I love that. And I love that, maybe not the source of inspiration, but certainly where the kind of kernel of an idea took shape and grew from there. That's the amount of dreams and stories and things you would have told in that room for many years, how it's kind of come full circle from the business journey perspective. That's very rare.
Totally.
And very unique. And I'm really pleased that that's the setting for today's conversation. It's funny, actually, because when I first came across you, and it's probably a little bit beyond that. So that was around 2018.
2018.
19,
yeah. 2018, 2019 is when it all started.
And so a couple of years after that, it's funny because my wife and I, Jem, we worked together and we were doing some research into the way that different leaders use their own social media, their digital presence to talk about the things that they care about and to connect with audiences. And funnily enough, you talk about serial entrepreneurship and all that sort of stuff. It was seeing you first popped up on our radar, seeing you being interviewed by the former CEO of ANZ Bank, Shane Elliott.
Mm-hmm.
And so Shane was talking to you through a Zoom call, not dissimilar to what we're doing now in the thick of COVID. I think it was middle of 2021 from memory. And Jem saw this thing and she goes, it's such an interesting example of, in this case, a banking CEO talking about a inspired, purposeful, not-for-profit leader. And she'd heard about ZeroCo before that, but that post was actually the catalyst for her to sign our whole family up to ZeroCo. And so at that point, that's when that's when we became customers. And it's interesting because actually, and I did go back and check the archives before we jumped on this chat today. In her Slack message, so she sends me the Shane Elliott post and she says, check this out, really interesting. And then she says, this is Mike Smith and what ZeroCo is about. Would love to have him fill in our podcast guest Q&A one day. And then she said, dreaming, I know. And so I love, in the spirit of full circle moments, I love that literally 5 years down the track, here we are having this conversation. So needless to say, right, the Christies are very big supporters and believers of yours and the work that you've done, which was why I was so keen to get you on the show today. So thank you for making time.
Oh, amazing. That's a lovely story. Thank you so much.
So take us back to those early days when ZeroCo started.
Yeah, so when I came back from this trip, I had the kind of a kernel of an idea, and like I didn't know what I was exactly going to do, but I knew that my business was going to try and solve both ends of the plastic problem. So help people use less single-use plastic in their home, and then use the proceeds to fund ocean cleanups. So that was the idea. I'm like, okay, I'm going to start some kind of company. I don't know what I'm going to sell or how I'm going to do it, but that's what I want to do. And so when I got back to Australia, I thought, I'm just going to go and start hanging out at the supermarket because that's like where all the single-use plastic is coming from. I'm just going to go and start watching people and kind of, I guess, creepily following people around the supermarket and watching what they were buying. And I found myself spending more and more time in the last 3 aisles of the supermarket, where all the personal care and home cleaning products are sold. And that's where I had like one of those aha moments where I just realized that section of the supermarket is like floor to ceiling, wall to wall, single-use plastic, right? Still is today, unfortunately. But then also from a kind of product innovation and brand perspective, there's just been no real innovation in that personal care and cleaning space for like generations, like if you think about laundry detergent, it's been the same thing for generations, the same brands, the same packaging, the same formulations. And I just thought, well, here's a really massive industry, really massive category that has had no innovation and is a really massive source of single-use plastic. I know nothing about this space, but why don't I go and start a personal care and home cleaning brand and work out how to remove the single-use plastic from the packaging and then go direct to customer was the initial business plan. And then, use the money that I make to go and fund ocean cleanups. So that was kind of like how it all started. And I had been living in Sydney previous to selling my last business and going overseas. My wife and I didn't want to move back to Sydney. So we moved in with my parents, and just while we were trying to work out where we were going to live and whether this business was going to be a thing. And I just started building this business. And then, and then COVID happened right at the early days when we're starting it, which kind of threw a massive spanner in the works. But then we just went out and started doing it basically.
So you didn't have a lot of category expertise.
Zero.
It's in the name, right? You also, I'm assuming, didn't have budget, didn't have resource, whether funding or personnel at that stage. You're facing into, as you described there, like a mammoth industry that hasn't really innovated for many, many years. And you're also competing with then those legacy brands for attention. And you're at the start of COVID.
Yep.
How did you overcome some of those barriers in the early days? What were the ways, what were the hacks that you got around that and built the profile and awareness for yourself, but also for ZeroCo as a brand?
Yeah, so I had previously sold a business. So I had a bit of money, not a crazy amount of money, but like the first time in my life where I had kind of money that I could play with and invest in things. And so I put $100,000 in to get the business off the ground and hired some product formulators to start making the products. But I knew that $100,000 wasn't going to get me very far. And I had no experience with fundraising prior to that business. So that was all very new. And I'd never been the public face of a business before. My previous businesses, I was just running it in the background. But I realized really early on that, you know, I was trying to build something more than just a company and a brand. I was trying to build this mission, this movement, you know, this community of people that wanted to get involved in solving the single-use plastic problem. And I realized that it would need to have a face to this thing. Like people rally around people, right? People don't rally around companies or brands. They rally around real, authentic people. And so I decided very early on that I was going to put myself out the front of this thing and become the public face of it and the spokesperson for it, which was super crazy daunting because I'd never done it. Like I wasn't really even into social media as just like a social thing. Like I just was not really into it. But I decided I had to do that. So I just began talking publicly about everything and putting everything up on socials and just being really honest and like vulnerable and transparent about everything. And it just started to really resonate. And so then we decided that we were going to need to raise some money. And so we thought the best way to do that is let's go and do a crowdfunding campaign, because again, it's like, how do we get people involved in this? Let's go and do a pre-sale campaign for the first batch of product. So we launched a Kickstarter campaign. And again, I'd never run a Kickstarter campaign, had no idea about it, made a video at my friend's house around the corner, put it up, and it went bananas. The Kickstarter just like, we ended up doing, I think it was about $750,000 worth of pre-orders in, I don't know what it was, like 15 days or something. It was a very short window of time. And so before we'd even launched the business, we had like 5,000 customers or something and $750,000 worth of orders. And so it went from just me in my bedroom to a very real thing very quickly, which was a very strange experience. I'd never kind of been through that before. And it was really a sign of things that were to come for the business in both a positive and in a negative way, to be honest with you. So we sold all these pre-orders and then COVID hit. And so we were due to like ship the first batch of products. I think we said it would be ready in 6 months after the Kickstarter. And because of COVID, that ended up blowing out to like 14 months or something. And then during that time, we were continuing to run pre-orders as well. So by the time we actually got ready to ship, we had something like 10,000 customers already on the books before we'd officially shipped a single box of product, which was really, really crazy. And then we went live and the business just went bananas really, really quickly. Like I think COVID ultimately played in our favor because lots of people were shopping online. Whilst the first bit sucked because it kind of messed up our supply chain, people were buying all these things online. So we had this great tailwind. And then the business just kind of went nuts. And before we knew it, we were doing like $1 million a month in sales really, really quickly. And I had to go and hire a whole bunch of people. And yeah, it went from like me in my childhood bedroom to 40 people in an office in Byron Bay quite quickly, which was like, you know, I didn't know how to do any of that. I didn't have the skills to do that. I was kind of winging it as I was going and holding on for dear life as this rocket ship just kind of took off, to be honest with you. So yeah, it was quite the journey.
What did that visibility do and enable or unlock for the business in those early stages? So looking past Kickstarter, what happened?
Yeah.
How did that help you?
Well, I look back on some of the content now and I'm so embarrassed, to be honest, because like I was just learning as I was going. I had no idea what I was doing. But like the overwhelming feedback that we always got, as like a business and a brand, and also just me personally as the person like out the front of it, was that people really appreciated the authenticity of everything that we did. Like, I just told people everything. Like, I told people all the great stuff that was going on. I told people all the struggles we were having, and not to like complain or whatever, just to be like, here's what's happening at the moment, you know, and like, especially during COVID when all the stuff, our whole supply chain got kind of thrown in out of whack. I learned really quickly that like the more transparent I was and the more vulnerable I was, the more people believed in me and in the mission. And that was a really powerful lesson for me, because then when we went and started funding our cleanups, I decided that I was going to go and do the cleanups and be on the ground, like getting dirty and sweaty and filming it and being there. And then that just created this whole other like swell of kind of organic viral content around like a founder leaving the office to go and clean a beach on the other side of the world. And it just became really powerful. And like, even to this day, I still feel a little bit uncomfortable in front of the camera, to be honest with you. Like, I've been doing it for 8 years now. But I just know that it's powerful, you know, when you're trying to build a mission in particular, just to put yourself out there.
So I can remember you popping up in my feed. You would be, you'd be on the beach in the Philippines cleaning up a whole heap of mess. I still remember, actually, and you're probably the one CEO that I know of who has used the phrase "a billion Fs" in a post before when you were talking. I still, that one stands out at me. The customer service response to why would you give us stuff about what's happening on beaches in other parts of the world. In short, for those who haven't seen it, it's an enjoyable post to look at and interaction. That one, but then also, you know, not just the stuff that you were sharing. It wasn't just the stuff where you're talking to camera and sharing that stuff. It was also the conversation that was going on around single-use plastic and around the impact that every individual could have essentially on their choices and how those choices affected the broader ecosystem. And I remember one exchange, for example, where you jumped into the comments and someone, and I don't remember the fellow's name, but he was talking about, I think it was coffee cups or something like that. And I remember you just saying, this isn't true. And you were calling out the misinformation, providing correct information, obviously observing the conversation that was happening around issues that you and the business was, you know, its mission was centered around. And just joining into that conversation, and through that, seeing the overwhelming response, not to a post that had been carefully manicured and crafted or whatever it was, shot with, you know, Mike in some compelling and eye-catching location, but honestly just a couple of lines of text that showed your passion and commitment to the issue. So you were there in the feed, you were there on people's screens, but you were obviously also listening and turning up and responding and participating and collaborating on ideas with that broader tribe or community in the comments as well. How much time and energy did that take for you? And looking back, you're laughing, I'm guessing a lot. How much time and energy did it take? And looking back, was that worthwhile? Was that time well spent?
God, that's a big pointy question. It was very time consuming. And I have a bit of a tendency to get obsessed with things. And so the single-use plastic thing has become a pretty big obsession for me. And particularly in that middle period of Xeroco where we were trying to grow really quickly and we were getting, you know, we were sparking a lot of debates and conversations. I just lived and breathed it, to be honest. And I probably it took too much of my life, to be honest. I wasn't great at balancing work and non-work. I got consumed by this business and this mission. And so, yes, it was really powerful. And yes, it was really important. Do I think it was time well spent? Yes. But did it come at a cost in my personal life? Yes, definitely. So if I had my time again, I probably would have been better at separating myself from the mission and separating the mission from my life. Yeah.
That's a really interesting call out and honest reflection. So thank you for sharing that. I think that the way that I look at that, not just your situation, anyone who sits in that chief executive, founder, visible leader chair, there's a lot of responsibility and there's a lot of scrutiny and pressure that comes with that. It's almost like at some point you go from being someone who's on a mission to someone who's essentially trying to feed the beast. And there is that kind of expectation that, well, what's Mike up to? I want to see what he's doing. Where's the latest update in my feed? The pressure on any individual and having a single point of failure is huge. And I appreciate this is difficult when you're in growth phase and when you're growing a business as opposed to a large enterprise. But ideally, what you want to have there in those early stages is that bench strength. And I talk to businesses all the time about this, the importance of having a coalition of leaders and people who can talk to different issues as opposed to everything falling on the one person's shoulders, then becoming the hero of the story as opposed to a character in the story. And that sounds very similar to what you're describing there in terms of detaching you and your life from the mission.
Yeah.
Ideally, you've got people there who can help you so that it doesn't all fall on your shoulders and doesn't ultimately become more than you can bear.
Yeah, 100%. And it definitely did get to that point in my life where it became too much and I was wearing too many hats and I was expecting too much of myself. And I had a total burnout as a result of the pressure of that. And I think it's one of the things I didn't fully appreciate going into it. Like this was my third business that I built. The other two were much smaller businesses. I wasn't the face of it, as I said before. We didn't take on external capital. So it was just a whole different dynamic. Whereas this was like, I was in the fire, like we'd raised a shit ton of money from VC funds and from the public. And we had this really big mission and I was the face of it. And we were a really fast growing company. Like there was so much pressure and I didn't have the awareness of how much pressure that was going to put on me personally. And I didn't have the coping skills either, to be honest. Like it's something that I've had to reflect on and go on a pretty big growth journey in the 12 months since 18 months now since I closed the business. Like I didn't take anywhere near good enough care of myself, and I wasn't managing my stress well. And that took a toll on me and on my family. And yeah, I wish I knew 3 or 4 years ago what I know now, because there's a lot of things I would have done very differently during those stressful periods, for sure.
And so you've alluded there, Mike, to ultimately what ends up happening in the business. And things don't necessarily go to plan, as is often the case with business, right? It very rarely goes to plan.
Yeah.
Can you fill our listeners in? What ended up happening in 2025?
Yeah, so I had to close the business. It was in March of last year, March of 2025, I decided to close the business. And it was a decision that I made. It was 12 months in the making, that decision. And it was the most difficult decision of my life. And essentially what had happened is we started to realize that the system that we had built to solve the single-use plastic problem wasn't actually that much better for the environment than the alternative, which is going to the supermarket. So our business model was we would sell, let's say, laundry detergent in a reusable pouch. We'd send the pouch out to the customer. The customer would send the pouch back. We would clean the pouch, refill it, and send it to another customer. And we just found that people weren't returning the pouches. So that was the first thing, a very, very low return rate. And that just meant we were essentially making single-use plastic packaging whilst marketing our business as a solution to single-use plastic. And it just didn't sit well with me. And even though we had no control over whether customers sent it back or not, it's still like I started the business to solve this problem. And the solution we had built it was marginally better, but it wasn't solving the problem at the scale that I wanted it to. And then we brought some life cycle assessors into the business to look at the broader environmental impact. Excuse me. Looking at the carbon footprint from sending product out and having reverse logistics, the amount of water that we were using in our cleaning facility, the amount of electricity and carbon emissions from the cleaning facility. And when we stacked all that up, it didn't feel like anywhere near as good a solution as we had set out to build, or as the public probably thought it was, to be honest. And so that sat very uncomfortably with me. And so then we went on this huge research and development project. It was probably 2 years in the making, where we set out to launch the world's first paper-based refill system, which would mean similar model where you buy a refill, but instead of it being in a plastic pouch that you send back, it's a paper refill that goes into your curbside recycling bin. Paper has infinitely better recycling rates in Australia. It's a renewable material. Like on all levels, on all metrics, it's such a better model, such a better packaging system. And so we developed this world first packaging system that was made out of paper that could hold liquids. We tested it. We got external testing done on it. We did all the things, and then we launched it into the world, and it just totally failed on us. And the testing that we had done and had third parties do was not right. And we basically, at that point, had about 100,000 customers in Australia, households that were using our product. And the packaging was like exploding in transit, and people were just getting a soggy cardboard box rock up at their door. And it was heartbreaking. And we and my leadership team sat down and spent months and months workshopping and trying to resolve the issues. And I remember we had this spreadsheet, and at one point it had 97 business critical issues that we were trying to solve at once. It wasn't like, oh, there's just this one thing that's going wrong, and once we solve that, it's going to be fine. We had 97 things in this like risk register, and we were burning a lot of money at the time because we're trying to solve all of these problems. Our customer acquisition costs had skyrocketed, and I just started to see reality. And I reached a point where I just lost confidence that we were going to be able to resolve all of these problems and get the business back on track. And we still had a lot of money left in the bank. So for context, we'd raised $15 million from VCs and from the public. And at that time, I think we still had about $7 million cash at bank. So we'd gone through about half the money. We were nowhere near like running out stage. But all of the modeling that we were doing, I could see that we were going to burn, $4 or $5 million out of this $7 million in a best case scenario to get us back to kind of where we were 2 years ago. And I just didn't think that was a very good use of investor funds. And I wasn't willing to throw bad money after good. And so I decided that I would much rather just be upfront with people and say, hey, we tried this really brave thing that no one in the world had ever tried to do before, and it didn't work, and I can't see how it's going to work, and I don't want to keep spending people's money on this thing that I don't believe in. And it was soul crushing, to be honest with you, man, to have to do that. And like we had 3,500 investors, mums and dads who'd like put in $100, some of them had put in $1,000. And had believed in me and believed in this vision. And yeah, having to go out and say to 3,500 people, hey, you're going to get 10 cents in the dollar back or something like that. Like they didn't get much money back. Was a pretty heavy thing to have to do. So yeah, that's what happened. So I closed the business in March of last year, and then it took us about 12 months to get all the money back to people. So it was only a couple of months ago that this is all wrapped up for me in my life. And most of the people, 99% of the people, have been really lovely about it and have been appreciative of the honesty and the way that the way I've carried myself and the way the business carried itself. And some people were pretty shitty about it, and that's life,
I think 99% to 1% is probably a pretty good result.
It's pretty good
for
totally
for anyone who might be upset.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting about that, and it is like it's a wild journey, I'm sure, Mike, and I'm sure there's plenty that you could go into there. What I'm particularly interested in about that process, when you started to recognize the problems, when they did manifest, and when you made the call and you didn't feel right, and being honest with yourself that it was a good use of funds. So you pulled the plug at that point. I'm interested to know, you said earlier that belief in the importance of being transparent and authentic and vulnerable in yourself and being present and in front of people. That same person, because it is you, and I know through our exchanges that strikes me as who you are from our exchanges that are off camera and offline as well. You obviously made a commitment to that. How did that same person carry that load when things weren't going so well? How did you, in terms of your communications and visibility to people and your honesty and transparency, how did you go through these tricky times particularly in the public digital domain?
Yeah. I think publicly I handled it pretty well, and I think privately I handled it pretty shittily, to be honest with you. I just wore my heart on my sleeve publicly during that whole process and just told people, like, here's what's going on. Here's why we've made the decision, particularly around like investors. I was emailing the investors every couple of weeks. We had a Facebook group that I was in every couple of days as all of this stuff was unfolding, and we were bringing in lawyers and accountants and liquidators and all that stuff. And yeah, I just figured, like, I've got nothing to hide here. I haven't done anything wrong. We're winding up the business in a solvent position and people are going to get something back. So I just told people what was going on, and most people responded really, really positively to that and were appreciative of the work and the effort and the honesty and all that stuff. So that was really nice. And I think privately, I just crumbled, to be honest. Like, it was a really heavy thing to have put 8 years into this business and have it fail. It took a real hit on my confidence and my sense of self-worth. And I had lots of just, I felt like a failure. I felt like I'd let people down. I felt like I'd let myself down. And at the same time that all that was going on, my marriage was breaking down as well. So kind of having the two most important things in my world fall apart at the same time. My wife left me, and my business collapsed. It was pretty humbling, I have to say, like pretty soul destroying. And I've had to do a lot of soul searching and a lot of personal growth and a lot of learning over the last, 12 months to make sense of all of that and to learn from that. And yeah, I'm just now kind of re-emerging out into the world. Like, this is my first podcast in a year and a half. I used to do these things like every week. I was on a different podcast talking to people about the Zero Code journey and whatever. And I just had to go silent and do some healing. And yeah, I'm just emerging out the other end of that period in my life. So yeah. Yeah.
And again, I sit here as I listen to your story and no one wants to go through that. No one wants to have that experience. No one wishes that experience on anyone.
Yeah.
And, again, I respect your honesty and authenticity and transparency, the things that we're talking about in sharing that, because I think what I take from that is, in the same way that you started this mission as a way to try and solve a problem that no one has been able to solve, in trying to inspire people to make better choices, all that sort of stuff. In a way, you're sharing your story today as a bit of a learning opportunity for others who might be going on a similar journey. And I think that's why it's so important to tell it, because it's not that the mission was wrong. It's not that the effort was wrong. It's not that the things that you tried to do in terms of building visibility of that mission and recruiting people onto that journey was wrong. But there are some important lessons that people can take away from that.
Totally, 100%. And yeah, that's why I agreed to do this podcast when you reached out, because I'm like, I would love to share some of my journey with people so that people don't make the same mistakes that I made. Because yeah, I would do so many things differently. Like I kind of touched on it before. I didn't take good enough care of myself, and I stopped exercising. I was 20 kilos heavier than I am today because I was eating terribly. I wasn't exercising. I was stressed out of my brain. So my cortisol level was through the roof. I was drinking alcohol too much to deal with the stress because I didn't know how to deal with that. I wasn't meditating. I wasn't journaling. I wasn't part of men's groups. I just had kind of shut my world down to be work and home. And there was just nothing in my life outside of that. And yeah, it just became too much, to be honest with you. Like I didn't have enough going on in my life outside of work and home, and I wasn't filling my own cup and taking care of my own needs. And therefore I just wasn't capable of being the best leader in my business or the best leader in my home and in my marriage. And ultimately that caused those two things to disappear from my life. And it was brutal. And I wish I could do things differently. And I hope, I don't know if there's anyone out there listening, take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't do anything great in the world. Because, if you're not whole and grounded and strong, then you can't do stuff for other people or the planet.
So, and we talk about in our house, we talk about the oxygen mask analogy all the time. And that is the simple truth. When you have oxygen and when you're feeling your best, you're able to give more of yourself. And knowing when you need oxygen and when you are okay is really important. So I'm sure, Mike, that there are plenty of founders out there, regardless of their life circumstances, who would hear that message and it would resonate. And I can only reinforce that. Make sure you're looking after your sanity. It's a wild roller coaster. Even if it's not your journey, our Propel story is very different to yours, but it's equally, 13 odd years of madness in its own right.
Totally.
I think if I can, and I don't want to try and put a silver lining on that at all, but what I do want to do is, that would have been incredibly hard to go through. You talked about the 3,500 personal investors and what they've done. You talked about the community of people that you had to tell. You talked about your own personal life and the challenges that had. When I was looking at that and experiencing it as a customer, so I got all your communications and saw what things were going out. One thing that I found really interesting, you held that line of transparency throughout. And you did end up sharing a post that said, we're closing down, and essentially said to people, and I'm sure that was across multiple platforms. For me, that popped up in my feed, and there was a post that had you on the beach in the Philippines. 30 April is going to be our last day of trade, essentially. And I want to play a few things back to you, because I think it is worth looking at, and I'm not sure how much attention you paid to that at the time. So I've got some numbers here. With that post, you had over 2,200 reactions on that post. You had essentially almost 300 comments from people and 20 odd reposts as well. And having gone through those comments, it's funny that you said the 99 to 1%. I would argue that around 95% of those responses, and again, I haven't done the maths, but arguably 95% of those responses were positive, and there was not one single example of told you so, or where's my money, or what have you done? But there were 4 notes, and this is the thing that I found really interesting. It wasn't necessarily just what you said, it's what came back. There were 4 notes that people kept hitting. One of them, and I suppose the majority there, was that people had admiration and they were proud about the fact that you had a crack. Around about half of them were talking about that shared sense of sadness and grief. They felt like they had literally gone on the same journey with you, and they'd ridden the highs and they'd felt the lows with you. And around that same amount, we're also expressing gratitude for what you'd done and the impact that you'd had. And equally, there was a sense of, and it was probably around half the number of commenters as well, there was a real sense of excitement about what would happen next. And people, yes, they mourned the end of one journey, but they were also celebrating your effort and mission and knew that would lead to something else. And this was a real mix of people. This was founders, this was investors, this was customers, this was people who, as you said, and literally there were comments, as an investor, I am sad that X, but I'm really, I'm proud of Y, and I'm really happy that, this, that, and the other. People who had lost money that were still backing you publicly. So I just want to share that because I think it's really important that you took a chance. Yeah. You tried to solve something that was very bold and brave. And no, it didn't work out. But as you said, there are lots of learnings along the way. And as I run through that again, as I look at these numbers, people didn't just follow the wins and the good times. People were there. They respected the mission. They respected what you were trying to do, whether it was an overwhelming success or not. And I remember one person saying, and this is something that you mentioned earlier as well, they said that, and I quote, you led with grace. And another person mentioned Roosevelt's famous man in the arena quote as well. And so despite being the end of the Zero Code chapter, what I took from reading through all that, and I don't know, as I play that back to you, what it leads you to think, but essentially it feels like your honesty, your transparency, your reputation held through that time because of the way that you led in public. And so if I can pull that bit out and talk to that for a moment, I know it hurt, as you said, soul crushing. How do you reflect on that community outpouring and respect and encouragement and excitement and all those things that people were saying? How do you reflect on that, knowing that door of Zero Co is closing?
Well, I got very emotional as you were talking then and reading that stuff out. And yeah, it was such a cacophony of emotions in that moment. Still to this day, like, I do feel, a lot of pride around what we did achieve. And I feel like grateful that people did acknowledge it and did see it, because there were times when I'm like 3 a.m. in the friggin' Philippines, 10 days into a cleanup, tired, sweaty, sunburned, exhausted, away from my wife and my daughter. And I'm thinking to myself, does anyone even care? Like, am I making a difference? Like, there were moments like that. And so when we did close the business, like, I received thousands of emails over that period after I announced it, like literally thousands of emails with people saying that they did see the effort and the sacrifice and the impact, and that they were inspired. And that was a really nice way to go out. Like, whilst it was hard and sad and all that stuff to be closing the business, it was nice to know that people did see the effort that we all put into doing it. So that was, it was good to receive a bit of validation around the closing window, the closing moment of Zero Co. And as I reflect on it more and more, like, the further I move on in my life and distance myself from the journey, the more I'm able to look at the positives and give myself a bit of a break, and be okay that it didn't work out, and know that I did give it a red hot crack, and like, far out, I really gave it a crack. And we did really good stuff. We removed 50 million water bottles from the world's oceans, which is insane to think that we were able to do that. So yeah, it's still a messy emotional thing for me, but I'm learning to look at it with gratitude for what it was. Yeah.
And so, Mike, you mentioned that you then had to go quiet.
Yes.
And it was, I don't know the exact time frame, but I'm going to say roughly 12 months, where from that point to then that time of healing and that time of reflection and all the things that needed to be done and worked through.
Yeah.
What was that like? What was that like, going quiet when you had been so intensely giving to this, this presence and this community over so many years?
Yeah, it was both very liberating and very lonely. It was nice to just turn off and like not feel like I have a responsibility to anyone other than myself and my family. It was nice to not have to be on all the time, in front of a camera, and like just the sheer volume of the content work that I was doing. It's just a lot. Like, I just felt like there was a camera in my face constantly every day. So just to be able to be like, I don't need to do that anymore, I can just do me for a little bit, was really good and really liberating. But then the kind of growth work was really lonely, and my wife left and took our daughter with her, and spending time in the family home by myself was a real big shock and a real big change. And I've just used that time. I've been doing a whole bunch of growth work, lots of stuff in men's programs, and really like looking at some really deep, uncomfortable things about myself and my beliefs and my patterns of behavior and things I learned as a kid, and kind of like rebuilding myself from the ground up, which has been literally the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It's been exciting. It's been painful. But I feel like I'm at a place now where I know so much more about myself and about leadership and about responsible masculinity, and I'm so much better aligned with my own values and what I want from my life. And yeah, I'm in a place where I'm starting to get genuinely excited about the next phase of this journey in the ocean cleanup space, because when I started the business, I just had this vague thing about I want to solve the global waste problem, which is very kind of amorphous and, not a finite goal. And during the kind of back half of the ZeroCo journey, I really started to articulate this vision of trying to remove 1 billion water bottles from the ocean as kind of my life mission. And so I've kept doing cleanup since I left ZeroCo. I've started a new non-profit and a for-profit entity called Untrash the Planet. We've kind of taken the team that we built in the Philippines with ZeroCo. We've got some sponsors. We've been doing cleanups still in the Philippines. We're up to about 65 million water bottles now that we've removed. And so I'm getting genuinely excited now again about working out how do I go from 65 million water bottles to 1 billion water bottles, which is 935 million more I've got to collect. But yeah, just in the last couple of months, I've started building business plans and working on some ideas. And I think taking everything I learned from ZeroCo, all those skills I developed, all this new growth work and understanding I have about myself, and how to do the things that I didn't do well, how to do those things better next time. I'm genuinely excited about this 1 billion bottle cleanup thing, and yeah, having a go, round 2 of this mission. Yeah.
Your second act,
the second
as I've heard you refer to it.
Yeah.
I like it. And I think that's really important too, in the same way that, with what happened with ZeroCo, and yes, the visibility, if I can call it that, around the shell of, or the vehicle of the business and the product and everything it stood for. Even though that didn't play out the way that you wanted it to, or anyone frankly wanted it to, even though that is now gone, the belief, the mission, and as I was saying before, the reputation, the belief people have in you to go on that journey and to inspire others to go on that journey with you. That 935 million may not be as daunting for you as it might be for many, many others because of that. So it's hopefully a huge encouragement that, the gratitude, the excitement, all those things that people expressed at a time when something was ending, that those same people are here as an asset, and their belief will help carry you through that next phase.
Yeah, totally.
And so with that in mind, as you said, I've got no doubt there are so many lessons, and I appreciate it is tricky to try and distill that into just a couple. But as you now start this Untrash the Planet journey, and as you now start that mission to get those 1 billion bottles out of our waterways, what's your advice to other people, and what will you be doing differently this time around when it comes to how visible and how connected you are to that community?
That's great. Well, I think the things that I take away from the ZeroCo journey that I did really well are really important, and I will continue to do those things. So just have a crack, put yourself out there and just go for it. The worst thing that happens is you fail. I feel like I had one of the biggest epic failures of startups in Australia in the D2C space, and I'm still here. I'm still smiling and laughing. Didn't kill me. So have a crack. I'm going to keep doing that. I think being transparent and vulnerable and honest and just wearing your heart on your sleeve has always seemed to serve me very well. So I'm going to continue to do that. I think the things I didn't do well, which I'm going to do better moving forward, is take care of myself mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. That has to be the core of everything. That starts there. Because if you don't have that right, it doesn't matter what you're doing out in the world. You will not get there if you don't take care of yourself. So that's probably the big learning for me, is do that stuff, and don't ever sacrifice that stuff for anything else, because yeah, it's the foundation of everything.
And like, if I can add one more to it, like you were saying, in terms of those other domains of life and having that support network and sharing the load and looking after yourself and all those things.
Yeah.
All I would add to anyone listening today is, like your story shows, you also don't need to take all the responsibility of that public digital presence, because I do think people underestimate the amount of weight that puts on someone's shoulders, and having that camera in your face and turning up and feeling obligated to reply to everyone. Make sure that you have that bench strength, that coalition around you, because in the same way as offline, we need to share the load. The same applies online, and 100%. You will achieve much more as a team of people.
Totally. Yeah. And also the last thing I would say is balance. Like, have balance in your life. Don't make your business and your family everything, because you do need to have other stuff, and you need to, at a bare minimum, keep your work and family balance healthy. Like, my balance was totally not healthy, but make sure you're doing other stuff. Make sure you're doing things that you are passionate about, and you have friendships and you invest in those things, and you go on holidays and you go on adventures, and you keep reading books and doing things that fill you with joy. And you don't just get too, blinkered focused on your mission.
Which I'm sure is a challenge that plenty of founders face. But Mike, I'm so thankful that you've taken the time today to sit down and share your story with people. I do respect the fact that, and as I said, you and I have had a bit of back and forth for a while now. I fully respect the fact that you took that time to go quiet, that you took that time to reflect and grow. And I'm sure that because of that period of reflection, that the story people have heard today and the lessons they've heard will be richer because of that. But I'm incredibly grateful that you've even, had the courage to come and share that story, and that those values that you've talked about from day one, the honesty, the transparency, the authenticity, they are still there. And they've been throughout this conversation. So a personal thank you from me for taking the time. A huge thank you, and again, encouragement and excitement from my family. We didn't talk about Jem and my girls in particular, who have followed your journey and been inspired by that along the way. But my son too, they have looked at what you've done and admired that. So know that you have had an impact, and they're particularly excited to see what happens next with Untrash the Planet. So Mike Smith, thank you so much for sharing your story and being so honest on the Your Digital Reputation podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks again for listening. If you've learned something from today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others. For all show notes, head to propelgroup.com.au. Thanks again for listening.